night for equities in the Asia-Pacific region. The most notable move in the region, though, was very much to the upside. The Nikkei in Tokyo that you can see in the top left-hand corner of the screen rebounded up nearly 0.9% from what was last week, its worst week all year. Well, in Europe, stocks are in largely negative territory this morning. I draw your attention there again to the top left-hand corner of the screen. The DAX in Germany off by 0.2%. It was off by more than that a little earlier on. And that's after a key survey showed business sentiment deteriorating for a fifth consecutive month. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 also in negative territory, off 0.2%. The mining heavyweights are weighing on the index, although Entain is the leading blue chip faller in percentage terms. Mentioned them a moment or two ago. Among the gainers, M&G shares are ahead, and this continues to benefit from positive comment following last week's results. The leading blue chip gainer right now in percentage terms, AstraZeneca, big industry heavyweight there, up by 1.33%. It's benefited from a push from one of the brokers this morning. OK. Bit of breaking news to bring you. We'll return to the markets later on this morning. We have some breaking news concerning the child killer, Lucy Letby. Our correspondent, Tom Parmiter, is on the line with the details. Tom, what have you heard?
During her trial that concluded here in Manchester in the summer, the former nurse, Lucy Letby, faced 22 charges in total, and there were 6 among those that the jury could not reach verdicts on. And the hearing this morning has been looking at what should happen in those cases. What can those families who did not get any answers through the trial expect? And the prosecution confirmed here in Manchester this morning that they will be seeking a retrial for Lucy Letby on one count of attempted murder, one of those counts that the jury could not reach a verdict on in the trial that concluded last month. That is in relation to child K, a baby girl who was alleged to have been harmed in the Countess of Chester Hospital in February 2016. They will not seek a retrial in relation to the other charges where the jury could not reach verdicts. They will be allowed to lie on file. And Lucy Letby appeared in this relatively short hearing in Manchester this morning via video link from prison in Yorkshire. And she spoke to say that she could hear and see the proceedings in court. And her barrister, Mr. Myers, told the court that she maintains her innocence on those charges as she does on all other matters. We know separately that Lucy Letby has started an appeal process, and that will be heard in due course at the Court of Appeal in London. And the judge indicated that that matter should be settled by the time this one proposed retrial would take place, which, as it stands, would be scheduled to be heard here in Manchester in June of next year, so June 2024, for that one count of attempted murder that Lucy Letby will face a retrial on. And the judge confirmed that that hearing would likely last for 2 to 3 weeks next summer.
OK, thanks, Tom. Right, we're going to go back to the market report now. I was telling you about the leading blue chip gainer in percentage terms this morning in the FTSE 100. That is AstraZeneca, up 1.25% now after receiving a push from one of the brokers. Outside the FTSE 100, 888 Holdings is off some 6% nearly. That's in sympathy with Entain, while Playtech is off some 3% for similar reasons. On the upside, the investment firm Pantheon International is ahead by some 2.75% on a trading update. On the foreign exchange markets, well, the pound has continued to drift following last week's unexpected pause in interest rate hikes by the Bank of England. Sterling today hit its lowest level against the US dollar since the 27th of March. It's currently more or less unchanged right now, that has to be said. The oil price, meanwhile, has perked up after suffering its first weekly loss in 4 last week. A barrel of Brent crude is currently changing hands at $93.58 a barrel. That's up 1/3%. Well, joining me this morning is Emily Montgomery, Associate Director for Personal Investing at Fidelity. Emily, good to see you this morning. Obviously, we had a lot of data to crunch through last week. This week, we get the GDP figures.
We certainly do. On Friday, we find out how the UK's faring. We get the second quarter figures coming in. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. Obviously, we've had sort of, positive side on the interest rates. We saw that inflation actually came down slightly, didn't it? Food inflation started to slow slightly, which is a positive. But obviously, we've still got, you know, a lot of belt tightening going on. So we've got to see if we are, you know, we're still in that sort of are we or aren't we heading for a recession. We've seen this elsewhere in Europe today. So it's sort of a worrying time, but it'd be interesting to see how the figures look on Friday.
Yeah, quite. You mentioned Europe. I mean, Germany already in recession, and we had some data from there this morning suggesting that business sentiment is really continuing to deteriorate.
Yeah, and this is from no less than one of the largest you know, economic think tanks over there. This would be the second recession within a year, because they had a contraction in the growth at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. Now they're talking about sentiment being weak. It's not as bad as was expected, but it's still coming off, and it does suggest that, yeah, we could be going into a second recession there within a year.
Obviously, the European Central Bank, like the Fed and the Bank of England, have paused on raising rates. Now, do you think what's going on in Germany completely rules out any further interest rate rises from the ECB?
You know, at the moment, I don't think anything rules anything out. It's such a sort of watching and waiting time, isn't it, for all of us? What they're going to do next, I don't know, but obviously it's looking uncertain, and the economy, if it's slowing down there even more, it's, you know, going to give them pause for thought, I think, before they make the next decision.
Yeah, now, something else that's on your mind. We had that big U-turn from the government last week on green targets, and you've been looking at the electric car sector in particular. Yeah,
there could be a headache coming here for the industry, because basically new sort of Brexit rules mean that from January, if vehicle manufacturers don't source parts either from the UK or the EU, they could face a 10% tariff. Well, that's looking to cost something like £3.7 billion over the next 3 years. Or, of course, the industry will stop making as many vehicles. It could mean a shortfall of up to 500,000 vehicles coming out as a result of this. So the call there is for them to think again about this tariff and not to actually, you know, call for this, because the industry is really not ready to source parts from the UK and Europe at the moment. You know, it's still very reliant on China and overseas other countries as well.
Looking more broadly at what the government announced last week on net zero, is this something that you hear a lot from clients about? I mean, the cost of replacing an old boiler with a heat pump is pretty immense.
It is very expensive. And obviously at the moment, with the cost of living crisis still biting so hard, you know, this is something people don't really want to be having to pay extra for at the moment. But obviously, I think looking longer term, it is something that government's going to have to address and actually come to some sort of decision on, and encourage people to go with it as well.
Yeah. Now, earlier in the programme, I was talking to Nicholas Hyatt from Wealth Club, of course, about inheritance tax. Is that something that bothers a lot of your clients? You must see investment behaviours being dictated by a desire to avoid it.
Definitely. I mean, it's a big issue, isn't it? Because it can be very expensive. And so a lot of clients are looking at ways they can actually mitigate inheritance tax and make sure they can pass on wealth to future generations without being penalised for doing so. So, yeah, that's definitely, and that's another especially sort of significant thing, I think, at the moment, when people are looking at the cost of everything and not wanting to diminish what they've got.
Yeah, I mean, a key way in which you can avoid IHT is to put everything in your pension, because pensions can currently be passed on tax-free.
Exactly. And, you know, using sort of all the modes we can to actually cut out having to pay any tax is obviously beneficial. So, yeah, we'd encourage all clients to actually look at, and everybody to look at sort of ways they can, you know, protect their money and make more of the hard-earned cash.
All right, Emily, good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining me. Still to come here on Business Live, well, we're going to be returning to Paul Smith to talk about the debanking crisis in the pawnbroking industry. Don't go away.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Slightly emirates, slight better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. Let's return now to reports that the pawnbroking industry is suffering from a debanking crisis which is forcing businesses to close. The National Pawnbrokers Association claims that more than half of its members have suffered from banks closing their accounts since 2015, putting some companies out of business. Well, joining me now is Paul Smith. He is the chairman and owner of Cash Brokers and a former president of the National Pawnbrokers Association. Mr. Smith, welcome to you. What is the reason given for these closures?
That's been one of the problems. They don't give a reason. When members have had their accounts closed, they've just received a letter from the bank without any warning or pre-discussion, informing them that accounts are being closed within 30 or 60 days. And then the banks have refused to discuss the reasons, saying it's commercially confidential.
There is a suggestion that it's because some of the banks are wary of money laundering. I mean, what sort of lengths does the industry go to prevent that?
We're as highly regulated as the banks, and no pawnbroker's ever been charged or even accused of money laundering. So any thought that there is a risk is a perceived risk rather than a real risk. We comply to all of the Financial Conduct Authority and HMRC requirements, so there is no risk of money laundering with pawnbrokers.
And is it one bank or two banks in particular, or is it industry-wide, this problem?
No, it's been an industry-wide problem since 2015. We have been working with the banks, their trade association, UK Finance, for the last couple of years, and the situation has improved in as much as there haven't been bank closures since we agreed a protocol with them. But that doesn't mean that new pawnbrokers can open bank accounts or that existing ones can get any finance to help their businesses grow. So
this is, by any measure, leading to a diminution of availability for a lot of customers then?
Availability and competition. There were in 2015 around 1,500 high street pawnbrokers. That's now in the 800. So obviously that's a reduction, not just in high streets that are covered, but also in competition.
Obviously, the government was pretty quick out of the blocks when Nigel Farage raised the issue of being debanked and said that people shouldn't be excluded from banking services for their political views. Would you like to see ministers step in and intercede on your industry's behalf?
Not just us, other small and medium enterprises, because pawnbrokers aren't the only ones that have been affected by this. And yes, it is a little frustrating when we've seen a lot of people lose their businesses, their staff have been put out of work, and we haven't been able to get any political focus. That when one politician is affected, then there's all of a sudden a lot of political focus. But we are pressing ministers at the moment to include small businesses in the requirement for banks to give reasons why they're closing accounts.
And the irony of all this is that it's coming at a time when demand for your services is pretty strong.
Yes, because there's a lot of the other industries, payday loans, etc., that are no longer around, the doorstep lending. We've always been a far better alternative for people, but we are now the only alternative to people that the mainstream financial companies don't want to deal with. So, people that can't get any overdrafts or loans from the banks rely on us. And without us, their only alternative is to go to loan sharks.
So what sort of people are coming into your businesses these days? Is it a different customer base these days?
It's always been a very wide demographic that use pawnbrokers. It's not unusual for somebody to pawn the family silver to help to pay for the school fees. But on the other hand, we also deal with a lot of people that are just looking for day-to-day expenses. The best way to look at a pawnbroking loan is it's like getting an overdraft for people that can't get an overdraft at the bank. So they have a short-term unexpected expense that they need to cover. Cars broken down, washing machines broken down, children need new school clothes, that sort of thing, and that's where we help.
That's fascinating. You're actually seeing people using your services to pay the school fees.
Yeah, it's depending on the location, there are some very high-end pawnbrokers in London that deal with some fairly wealthy individuals. But a lot like my branches, which are in rural market towns, are just helping generally people get on with their day-to-day expenses.
All right, Paul, we have to leave it there. It's good to talk to you this morning. Glad we were able to finally establish communications with you. Thank you.
OK, thank you.
Well, that's it from me for the time being. I'll be back at 4:30 this afternoon with our afternoon edition, in which we will have all the latest on the Hollywood writers' strike and probably, maybe, something on the car workers' dispute in the United States, which is continuing to rumble on and hit plants across many different states now, not just the three that we mentioned previously. So do join me for that if you can, and do stay tuned, because coming up after this short break is Jane Secker. Thanks for joining me this morning. Cheerio.